What's up, guys? Josh Law here with the Card Guys, and today I'm going to be bringing you guys my deck tech for Dorinthea Iron Song for the Outsiders Road to National season. This deck is a little bit different than the last few decks that I've been putting together. Still Dawnblade based, but this is really a deck that returns to the basics of Dorinthea. It's a deck that felt very, very smooth at RTN, and it's a deck that I think you guys will enjoy, and I think it's very, very powerful in this current metagame. And it's a deck that rewards the fundamentals of Flesh and Blood, and it rewards, good defensive piloting and good offensive piloting. So for those of you who want the list, I'm going to put it up on screen here. I'm not going to waste your time. Have fun, enjoy. There's a link to go play it on Talishar. But for those of you who want to hear my thoughts on the cards, as well as me breaking down the main deck and the sideboard, that's what we're going to be doing. So let's just get into that. All right, guys, let's get down to business here. This is the main board for the list. There are 53 cards that I play in every single matchup, along with 3 equipment pieces here that I play in every single matchup. So we're going to cover the main board, and then we're going to talk about the sideboard. So the way that I've kind of laid this out here is there's some themes and sections, and I put cards that are kind of relevant together. All right, so up here, as you can see, all of these cards give go again. These are some cards that are played pre-combat, right? We have our attack reactions here, and then we have, some more specialized attack reactions here. So let's go through the cards. Now, for those of you who have played Dorinthea for a while, if you look at this main deck, other than Glistening Steel Blade and Precision Press, these are old school tools. This is a deck you could have built 2 years ago. But I guess when we get to the sideboard, I'll talk about also why I didn't include some cards as well. All right. So let's first talk about the game plan of the deck. So the game plan of the deck is to present Go Again, possibly with some extra threats, and then either pump it with Iron Song response so that we're efficient with our turn, or pump it with Overpower such that a simple 0-for-4 D-React or something like Oasis, Respite, or Reinforce the Line does not do anything. We also have a lot of redundancy with Singing Steelblade. And then, of course, if they overblock, Twinning Blade will punish them, right? So let's just run through each card here, and I'll give some thoughts on it and why they're in the deck. All right, so first of all, we run 9 copies of Warrior's Valor. And this is very much intentional. Like in the past, I used to just run the reds and the blues. There was even a time where I even dropped the blues in favor of like cards like Out for Blood. But this effect is just really, really, really important to have. And it's mainly because of the rate and the effect, right? So it pumps your weapon. It also gives you conditional Go Again, and it's really the bread and butter of the deck. That's why we run 9 of them. And this deck actually is running a ton of yellow cards, but I think this is one of those cards, along with yellow Overpower and yellow Iron Song response, that we just need as many effects of this as we can get. And yeah, I think it's a very, very, very good card. So we're running all of them. Now, these 9 here are conditional. These here are unconditional, which is nice. Also, our sideboard, which includes 5 other Go Against, or 4 other Go Against, are also unconditional. So, it's preferred to have unconditional go again because we can combo with things like Twinning Blade, or we can play like an energy potion or follow up with Nourishing Emptiness. But this is fine. It pumps and it does what we want it to do. So we're going to run all 9 of them. We also include Spoils of War. Spoils of War is just as good as Warrior's Valor, arguably better, because it threatens, it's very threatening with Twinning Blade. Same thing with Glistening Steel Blade. This is a card that most decks are really, really, really going to hate to see this, because the correct way to block Glistening Steel Blade is generally you block this for 6. Assuming that there's no pre-pump other than that, right? Because then you don't get blown out by an attack react, you don't get blown out by a D-react, right? Or you don't get blown up by a +3 pump, and you don't get blown up by Twinning Blade when you block 6 on a Glistening Steel Blade. But with Singing Steel Blade into Iron Song Response, or one of these overpowers, or this Twinning Blade, that strategy no longer really works. So this is actually a giant pain in the ass for most decks to deal with. We also have cards like Precision Press and Hit and Run. These are just blues that have go again. Generally, we're not going to play these, but if we have tempo, this density of go agains basically means every single turn we're going to be presenting we're going to be threatening to hit twice with Dawnblade. And that basically means that they can't really try to stall and brick you out, basically, because you just have too many of these effects, right? Obviously, we run Glint the Quicksilver. This is an excellent card. This card gets better and better the later in the game it goes because they're more incentivized to block. So this is a high priority to pitch back into your deck. All right, so we've covered all the go-agains here. There are 6, 12, there are 24 here. And like I said, there are 4 in the sideboard. So we actually have 28 sources of go-again. And that also means like matchups like against Dromai, we have a lot of ways to clear dragons. When in the past, if you were running like 20 to 22 sources of go again, that matchup would be kind of rough. But with 28 sources of go again, you're basically guaranteed to draw 1 each turn. And this deck, because it has quite a few yellows and 23 blues if it really wants it, is going to have the resource, is going to have, you're not going to draw hands with 4 reds very often with this deck, like less than 1 in 100. So yeah, that's the go agains. Let's talk about Steelblade Supremacy here. So this card obviously is one of the best cards in the deck, but this is a card that requires some setup, especially against more defensive decks. You're going to want to pair this with an energy potion and a overpower generally. And if you can time it in such a way that you can hit 3 times with it, that's how you get maximum value from that card. In order to do that, you're going to have to utilize Twinning Blade and Refraction Bolters. So yeah, it's one of the best cards. Don't be afraid to pitch this back into your deck, because having this in the late game is also really, really good, because they probably haven't kept defensive options in their deck at that point. Sharpened Steel. This is a card that I've come around on quite a bit over time. This card basically says, you know what? If you're kind of cheating on your blocks, if you're running a lot of 2 blocks in your deck, this card basically says you have to give me 3 cards, maybe 4 cards. Like let's talk about a sample hand. So if we go Red Warrior's Valor, Sharpened Steel, pitch a blue, and swing, that's for 9 on hit go again. For a lot of decks, to block 9 is really hard. That often demands a 4-card block from a deck that has, if they just run a few 2 blocks, it could just easily be their whole hand, right? Or if they give you 3 blocks, then their turn is really, really not powerful, right? So this card, not as flashy as the other cards, but this card really, really, really allows you to punish decks that are running a lot of 2 blocks, which there are quite a few in this metagame, right? And this this card also allows you to present a large, because this costs 0, this allows you to be very, very efficient with it. Like I said, like a 3-card hand, Warrior's Valor, Sharpened Steel, and a blue is like a hand that's presenting 9 damage or 12 with a counter, right? So this card actually asks a lot of questions of your opponent, and it's quite nice. Singing Steelblade. This is basically extra copies of Overpower and Iron Song Response, or Route as well. And it also is a key combo piece with these cards here, because you can grab Twinning Blade. And yeah, it's a powerful card. People know it's a powerful card. And because you're threatening go again so often, sometimes you're presenting, you know, extra threat on your turn. The likelihood that you're going to get reprise off of Singing Steelblade is much higher, right? Twinning Blade here. This is a card that requires a little bit of setup. You obviously want to pair it with Unconditional Go Again, or you want to pair it with Steelblade Supremacy and Refraction Bolters on a triple hit. And this is a card that basically creates the third, I guess, move in your... If we think of... There was a great video recently about how Fab is a fighting game. So if you think of it, Dorinthea kind of has 3 moves. Small pump, large pump, and go around, right? So this just creates more uncertainty about what you're going to do. And if they don't have a D-React, this gets more powerful later in the game. So this is another card that against the control matchups you're going to want to pitch. You always want to ensure that there's 1 in your deck, because strong players, the very first thing that they're going to count once we're like 40 to 45 cards done with the deck, they're going to check for 3 copies of Singing Steelblade in the graveyard and 3 copies of Twinning Blade in the graveyard. Because as soon as... And they don't even need to see 3 copies of Singing Steelblade. Like, if they see 2 copies in the graveyard and they know you pitched the 3rd one, they know that, you know, this is not a threat, right? So keeping a single copy of Twinning Blade in your deck for the whole game is actually pretty important. Hence, we run 3. I've seen some people cut it down to 2. I don't really think that's correct. I think this card is just too powerful, even though it requires a little bit of setup. You do want to just have this effect to be tutored for. And you think about like late game as well. You're going to be relying on things like precision press, hit and run. You may have a glint left in your deck, right? And when your opponent doesn't have a D-React late game and you're kind of relying on your blues, this is something that happens very often against Oldhim, right? Is Twinning Blade becomes one of your win conditions in the late game. So yeah, I think I've harped on it enough. Just, you know, make sure you pitch your Twinning Blades back in your deck in the control matchups. All right, let's get to like the core concept of this deck. I guess I kind of probably should have brought this up earlier, but what makes this deck unique is this section here, right? Or what is not in this section here, right? So this deck is only running Iron Song Response and Overpower. There's no Out for Blood, there's no Stroke of Foresight, there's no Puncture, there's no Razor Reflex, there's no Thrust. None of those 1 cost +3 pumps. Now, what is the reasoning behind that? Well, the reasoning behind that is that in order for Dorinthea to have a smooth turn, if you go Warrior's Valor and you rely on a card like Out for Blood to get over a block, you have to keep an extra card. And that means you did not block, or you blocked with 1 card, assuming you have maybe Valor in Arsenal. And when your opponent has a D-React, you lose a lot of value, because not only do you not get your second hit, you also wasted a card, because you kept that card in anticipation to pitch for the second swing, or bracers into second swing, right? And that play pattern, if that happens enough, which, spoiler alert, in this metagame, will happen, you just fall really far behind as Dorinthea. So I was, trying to think like, okay, what type of play patterns do I actually not mind them having D-reacts, right? And so the key play pattern is when I present Warrior's Valor with an Iron Song response as my pump, assuming I have a blue, right? This 3-card hand is very good. If they have a D-react, fine, so be it. I traded an Iron Song response for a Sink Below. That's fine. I have 8 copies of Iron Song response, right? I have 5 copies that I'd realistically want to play. You don't really want to play the blues, but they're there, right? So I have 5 copies of Iron Song response I don't mind trading out for Sink Belows. And conversely, if they have a D-react and I have a overpower, as long as I could pay for it, which this deck is configured to pay for overpowers. You see there's lots of yellows. You see there's energy potions in the sideboard. There's a ton of blues. A overpower red and an overpower yellow both break through against a Sink Below or Fate Foreseen, Oasis Respite, Reinforce the Line, right? And so basically having 5 copies of overpower, 5 copies of Iron Song response that I want to play creates a situation where you can play very, very mid-rangey, and you can kind of wait for the right hand, which really doesn't take very long with this deck, right? All you have to do is find a go again, enough resources to pay for it, maybe combine it with a threat, and then a pump. And no matter what happens, unless they have a massive D-react like Staunch Response or Unmovable, your attack is going to hit. And that's really, really, really important when you play cards like Steelblade Supremacy. When you play Steelblade Supremacy, you need to make sure your attack hits, or it has the ability to draw so much attention that your opponent overblocks it, right? So you have to get value from your cards like Steelblade Supremacy. And cards like Out for Blood, Stroke of Foresight, and Puncture, unfortunately, do not do that. Those cards are actually very, very good in Blitz, because the density of D-reacts is much, much less in Blitz. But in CC, the fact that, Sink Below is probably the most ubiquitous card in the whole format, just means that you got to be able to deal with that as Dorinthea. And this basically does that. Okay, so let's move on here. So obviously we have a copy of Route here. 1 copy of Route wins you a lot of games. Don't be afraid to block with this if needed. And generally you don't want to play this unless it's going to kill somebody or it's on a Supremacy turn. I'd say it's also decent. Remember that one of the best closing sequences that you can do is pitching a Route next to an Iron Song Determination, next to a blue. That gives you, an incredible kill potential on the second cycle. Okay, running through the equipment here. We run Crown of Providence. If you don't have Crown of Providence, you can run Arcanite Skullcap or the Helm of the Sharp Eye is totally fine as well. But I'd say if you're going for the most competitive list possible, Crown of Providence is better than both of those options, mainly because this insulates you against CNC, and this also gives you the option to filter your hand a little bit. But the other two helmets are not bad either. Brave Forge Bracers, this is a staple card at the moment for Dory. Gives you a bunch of extra health here. Also gives you a extra energy sink that you can utilize in most matchups, except for against Oldhim, because that breaks the combat chain. And then obviously we play Dawnblade because Dawnblade is the weapon that fits this style. It is pretty easy to get this first counter against most decks, especially if they're aggressive. They will often just cede the first counter to you. And then they will realize, maybe too late, that giving you the first counter actually is very, very dangerous because of the way this deck is built. That a lot of them will give you the first counter and kind of bank a sink below and, you know, try to shut you down on the second time. Yeah, with overpower here, that doesn't really work. Okay, I think that kind of covers the main board here. Again, this the way that I like the sideboard is I have a main deck that I run in all matchups, and then I add some cards, right? So there's 53 cards here, so we're going to add at least 7 cards from the sideboard. In several matchups, we will bring in much more than 7. So yeah, let's talk about the sideboard now and get into that. All right, guys, as you can see, this is the sideboard for the deck. So let's just run through that. So the first thing I want to talk about is the chess piece and the leg piece here. So the chess piece, in short, whenever you bring in Steelblade Shunt, or whenever you think the match will go long, like against Icelander, Dromai, this is when you would bring in Tunic, right? In all other matchups, we're going to be running Courage. So that most of the aggro matchups, we are going to be running Courage. Tunic just allows you to, you know, utilize Shunt in an efficient manner. It also allows you to just get a lot of value from the game, you know, going 18, 20, 20, 30, 25 turns or so. You know, ultimately it can just block for 1 as well, right? So good card. Tunic, you know, also just makes your draws more smooth because, you know, sometimes you don't draw blue, and, you know, Tunic can bail you out there. And Tunic also allows you to use overpower with a go again with a yellow and a blue instead of needing 2 blues, right? So that's the Tunic versus Courage. For the boots, in every single matchup, you're going to be running bolters, except for against Dromai. I prefer to run dynamos against Dromai because you have just so many sources of go again. You're able to refresh the counter on dynamos, and it, you know, the game goes a decent amount of time, right? So I typically run Tunic plus dynamos against Dromai, and you get a ton of value out of that over the course of the game. It also, you know, blocks some important breakpoints from that deck, like against Kyloria. So if you want, you can also run dynamos against you know, more mid-rangey decks that come in with breakpoints that you know are they're playing a little bit more defensively. That would be decent. But of course, know that in order to execute a triple hit combo, normally it's going to require you to use your bolters, right? So that's, you know, a trade-off that you'll have to make, right? So the dynamos are more defensive oriented, and the refraction bolters are more offensive oriented. And in general, you're going to want to use the bolters together with the Courage. That's the most efficient way to do it. But, you know, there will be games where you use one and you don't use the other, right? Just depends on what hand you draw. All right, let's talk about the sideboard cards here, the non-equipments. So Nourishing Emptiness is a card that we play in most matchups, but against decks that have Codex of Frailty, I actually don't run this. Reason being, against Lexi, the matchup is so dependent on tempo. I could have several counters on my weapon. I don't want to spend a turn to play Nourishing Emptiness. Now, I know a lot of people are probably going to disagree with me on this, saying like you can loop this against them. It's decent, but the way that I play against Lexi, I play very aggressively, and I also try to utilize my arsenal to keep an extra pump or keep extra things that I draw with Supremacy, right? So I feel like this is a card that I wanted most matchups just for the effect, but I actually don't prefer to use this against Azalea and Lexi. Against the assassins, I would actually use this as well, even though they can run Codex of Frailty. Okay, moving on from that, we have 2 copies of Run Through, 2 copies of Driving Blade here. This just gives you some more go against sources, and they block for 3. This is actually a deck that, sometimes we want extra blues, but we actually want blues that block, and sometimes we want blues, we're okay with blues that don't block. And, based on going first or second, that could also, determine which ones we want to bring in. So yeah, just extra sources of go again. Driving Blade is actually a card you'll almost never play because it costs 2. But if you have full tempo, it can work. It also, these are both unconditional go again as well. Run Through, this is a card that you're not going to want to bring in too often unless you know that your opponent has very low armor or you think the game is going to go very, very long. Reason being is the amount of hands that work with Run Through are a little bit lower, especially against decks with armor, because they can just shove their armor in front of it and kind of shut down your turn, because we aren't running the traditional plus 3 pumps, right? Okay, Ironsong Determination. This is a card that I have definitely poo-pooed on in the past, but I think this is a card that in this current metagame is actually very, very valuable. This is one of the best cards in the game against Lexi. When your opponent has no armor, this plus any go again is going to be a counter, which means you hit once, you hit twice, you get a counter. So that means this was essentially a sharpened steel, right? This was a 1 card, 3 value minimum, right? If you can't get multiple cards, or if you can't get 3 damage from the Ironsong Determination, that's fine. As long as you can get their armor, that also will help a lot. This is a card that when you play it with a medium threat, often will get players to overreact and block with their armor. And the quicker that they block with their armor, the better it is for Dory, right? Because that means there's less things that you have to play around, right? So this is a good card. Comes in quite often, actually, but there are a few matchups that you wouldn't want this. Those matchups would be matchups where you are going second and you think that they have decent amount of armor and it's not going to be super fast game. So like against Briar, if I go second, I'm not going to be playing Ironsong Determination against them, right? They have decent armor, they have embodiments. That card's not very effective, right? Okay, let's go over here and talk about these cards here. Single copy of Biting Blade. This is my pet card, and I've talked about this card quite a bit. This is a card that has 2 really good uses. First of all, this is the best card. This is the best pump to have when you execute a triple hit combo, because this will give you the most value for a single card, right? It'll also probably push your triple hit into weird breakpoints for them. The other great use for Biting Blade is when you tutor this with Singing Steel Blade, with Reprise, obviously. That will bring the attack up to +5, and that obviously becomes a nightmare to block. This is a card that I wouldn't bring in unless I thought the game was going to go decently long, and this you have to be able to play this, and even you have to be able to play this with Singing Steel Blade. Which means if they don't give Reprise, this is less valuable of a card, right? So this is kind of for those mid-rangey control matchups, right? or when you really need to get to 60 and you want a 3-block, right? Next we have Ironsong Pride. So this is a pretty good card. Less good nowadays because Icelander is not running around rampant. But it still has its uses. But you just need to be very, very careful with Ironsong Pride, right? So ideally, you want to run this when you go second. So if you're going first, generally you're not going to run this unless it's a really long matchup like against Dromai or Oldham, then you would run it. And then you need to ensure that you don't get massively punished for playing this on turn 0 if you're going second. So that means against decks like Lexi and Phi, even if I go second, I'm not going to run this because they go too wide and I could leak a ton of damage on turn 0 if I have a no block in hand, right? Speaking of no blocks, the whole main deck, 53 cards, they all block for 3 unconditionally, right? So, you know, I'm very, very, very particular with adding, you know, no blocks. And you kind of just have to know what your opponent could be capable of doing and then decide whether or not running Ironsong Pride is correct, right? But this card is very, very powerful because often getting a single counter already creates some weird breakpoints, already gets their armor. So, you know, Ironsong Pride, Ironsong Determination together both grind down their armor, which or Nourishing Emptiness as well. These cards just allow you to set up a game state where just the piloting becomes much, much easier once your opponent is out of armor. All right, let's talk about some of our defensive cards here. We got 3 copies of Red Steelblade Shunt and 3 copies of Sink Below. So Steelblade Shunt obviously will come in when we, whenever we're playing Tunic, we're going to be generally playing Steelblade Shunt because this is one of the most effective ways to gain tempo. And Steelblade Shunt is, you know, excellent against Bravo, excellent against Azalea in the mirror. And I would bring this in against most Oldhams as well. Just because it's worth 3 damage, possibly, if they attack with their weapon. And it also, you know, shuts down things like Pummel. It's also very, very card efficient, which will allow us to, you know, get to the late game on rough card parity with Oldham. Good card. But you need to play that with Tunic. Sink Below, this is just a excellent card in general, and this can allow you to, it's just a powerful card. I don't really need to talk too much about it. I think this is in the past I wasn't running Sink Below. The deck was just too tight, but now there's a few slots that have opened up, and I think, you know, against Azuri especially, this card is pretty important to have. So yeah, those are the defensive cards. Another thing is, against all the aggro matchups, I'm not going to be running Sink Below. You need your offense to tick. You don't have very many turns to set up a powerful tempo taking turn, and Sink Below just doesn't quite do that. So don't play them against aggro. Finally, we have 3 copies of Energy Potion. This is the card that enables you to play Overpower on demand. Excellent card when you're going first. Decent card when you're going second in many matchups. And this basically bumps the blue count up. I think from when you run all 5 of these, you'll be running 23, right? So there's 18 main boards. So if you run 3 of these, you'd be running 21, and then you run those, you'd be running 23. With that many blues, you can generally you won't actually run into too many energy problems. You can obviously play with the ratios and figure out what works for you. But you know, whenever you can put down an E-Pot, especially against the slower matchups, that's often worth it. Against the aggro matchups, generally I'd only play this turn 0. I probably wouldn't play this turn. If I go first against Lexi, I probably would not be playing Energy Potion because, you know, if I draw an Energy Potion, I'm going to be tempted to play it, and then Lexi is going to get double free reload on turn 0, which is, you know, not good. All right, so that kind of covers everything. I just want to kind of emphasize that how this deck is sideboarded is actually a little bit tricky, because this is a deck that really wants to, roll and then pick first or second and then kind of go from there. So cards like Ironsong Determination, good going first, not as great going second. Same with Epot. Cards like Ironsong Pride as well. You want to be playing that going second, not so great going first. And then, whether or not you need blocks, you can add blocks if you need it, or you can, pick more situational cards that don't block, right? So the sideboarding gets a little complicated, and I'll be writing a sideboarding guide for this deck for the CardGuyz Patreon. So be on the lookout for that. Okay, so that's gonna kind of wrap it up. Let's go chat a little bit and we'll get out of here. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed me breaking down the main deck and sideboard for the Dorinthea Ironsong Classic Constructed deck. This deck I think is pretty well positioned right now, and it's a deck that's going to reward you for piloting it well as knowing your matchups. And this is a deck that I think really just plays pretty well into this metagame. It's got answers for Lexi. It's got excellent defensive options for decks that have Dominate like Bravo and Azalea. It has enough gas to push against Oldhim, and it has enough sources of Go Again to deal with Dromai, and it is quick and tanky enough to deal with aggro decks in general. So I think this deck is actually pretty good. I think there are a few changes that could be made if you want to adapt it to your local meta. For example, there is no Arcane Barrier in this deck. You could easily add an Arcane Barrier slot or add some Oasis Respite if you have some Kanos in your area. But I think, if you do that, just try to maintain the core of the deck, which is present Go Again, have a pump, maybe add some extra threat to it with Supremacy or Steel or Glistening Steelblade, and then execute and go from there. Anyways, I think this is gonna pretty much wrap it up. So if you want a detailed sideboard guide, I'll be writing that up for the CardGuyz Patreon in the coming days, so that should be up pretty soon. In addition to that, I also do coaching. So if you are interested in getting coaching, obviously if you want coaching and you're a warrior player, you're going to get the most value out of it. But I do obviously play other classes and I know about other classes. So you can message me on Twitter or on Discord. So that is available. Anyways, if you guys are going to RTN for the third week, I hope you guys have a good RTN season. If you want to know more about how this deck came about, as well as how my RTN went, there was a video that went up yesterday. I was talking with my teammate Nathan Crawford, and I think that's if you want some more content there, I think that would be a good video to watch. Maybe you came from that video. I don't know. We'll see. Anyways, I think that's going to wrap us up here. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys have a good day. See ya.